lot of folks will probably have some questions about gardening, but I will get this going. So I'm Megan Fulton. I am the director at Forest for Monarchs. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to introduce you to our other presenters. We have Cynthia Zhang. She is a high school senior now, right, Cynthia? Yes, and so she founded Monarchs Matter, a nonprofit organization that is working towards conservation and education. She's based in New York, in the Long Island region, and she has a lot of great information that she's going to share about what she does. And she'll even be kicking things off a bit more about the Monarch. And then our board member, Michaela Rogers, she's also a wildlife biologist with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Services. So excited to have her here. She'll be talking about milkweed, monarchs, and how you can garden to best optimize your chances of having a successful garden. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I apologize for any of the tech issues on my end, and Cynthia will get things going.
Yeah, let's share my screen. Thank you, Megan, for the intro. So yeah, like Megan said, I started Monarchs Matter in the summer of 2023 when I started raising monarch butterflies at home by myself, as well as learning how to tag them for community science research, which I'll talk about a little more later as well. And after raising monarchs on my own at home for one summer, next summer I wanted to extend this experience to more youth in my community because I found it really magical and very insightful when experiencing the monarch's metamorphosis with my own eyes, and I feel like more youth or even adults should experience that and understand the monarch's life cycle and how it exists in the grand scheme of things, since the environment affects so much of their growth and migration process. So I mainly use monarch raising as a way for science and education, and as raising monarchs is like no means to like actually increase their population, as that would be unrealistic, and also we want to like leave nature be. So what we emphasize to our students is to plant milkweed, restore habitat, and adopt sustainable habits for biodiversity conservation in general, since the environmental issues impacting the monarch butterfly is also threatening over 1 million species worldwide. So climate change, pesticide, herbicide use, habitat loss, it's not just unique to the monarch butterfly, but we're just using the story of the monarch butterfly to empower communities to combat the biodiversity and climate crises, which is our mission here. Okay, so as a bit of background, if I'm sure most of you know that the monarch butterfly population has declined by 80% since the 1990s. This is just for the eastern migratory monarch population that migrates to Mexico. And the western population that stays around California and the western US has actually declined by 99%. So it's definitely a really big ongoing issue. And some of the major causes of the monarch decline are deforestation or habitat loss, particularly with the fir forest and the other native trees in the Mexican highlands, where the monarch butterflies hibernate during the winter to stay warm and for shelter. And second, pesticide and herbicide use. This is an image from a town in the US where the pesticide spraying has caused a lot of monarchs mortalities, as shown here. And as well as climate change, of course, it impacts their migration patterns, their temperature and weather cues. And studies have also shown that increased precipitation and extreme weather from climate change also impacts the amount of eggs the monarch lays. And as well as warming temperatures have started to shift the monarch population upwards, so that kind of raises concern about whether or not the milkweed availability will also shift northward with the monarch population. And if not, that will definitely cause some issues with the discrepancy between where the monarchs are and where the milkweed and their food and shelter actually is. And of course, monarchs are important because they're a vital pollinator for wildflowers in our food. It's a food source for birds, insects, and small mammals, even though they are a bit toxic from eating the milkweed, which has like the white sap in it, which with the toxins, and also significant in many cultures, in our lives. So we want to, especially the younger generation, wants to continue to protect the species. So future generations can also experience it. And that's me holding a monarch butterfly. And also another thing I like to note, since I've done some research, scientific research on monarch butterflies, is that they are a very effective biological indicator, since there are small migratory insects which are native across North America. They um, are a proxy or an indicator of the larger environmental changes that are happening, since they occupy such a wide area and are native across so many ecosystems. So that makes them very effective for analyzing habitat changes and overall ecosystem health. So one of the solutions is to grow milkweed, as milkweed is their sole food source for the monarch larvae. And um, also, it's important to note that native plants like milkweed sequester carbon into their roots in soil, so that kind of tackles the climate change aspect of their decline, as well as supporting other native species. And Michaela will talk more about selecting milkweed and the specifics about gardening milkweed. But just like a rough idea, with youth, I also try to engage them in rewilding and planting native plants. So for 2 years, might be a little bit small here, but everyone's holding a milkweed plug. Um, this year we did salt milkweed, this year we did common milkweed to plant in their own homes. And a lot of students said this really started their um, rewilding journey in their yards and gardens, making things more native and bringing in more native insects and birds into their garden. So another one of the activities that I do with youth is we do a summer program to not only raise and tag monarch butterflies, but also contribute to community science projects like the Monarch larva monitoring um, project, or MLMP, which is shown here. And these are the students looking in the milkweed patches at native community gardens. And basically what they do is they count milkweed eggs, the different caterpillar instars, which is how big the caterpillars are, and or like the progression of the different caterpillars in the life cycle, as well as number of chrysalises or pupae and adult monarchs. And after they record all this data, we input it into the online portal for MLMP, which will inform scientific research and help scientists analyze the monarch dynamics and population across the US. And the second community science project that we participate in is the Monarch Watch tagging program. So every single time we raise a monarch butterfly, if it's after mid-August, which is tagging season, we will tag our monarch butterflies with a little sticker with a uniquely coded number letter code on a sticker. And afterwards, I'll show you that we input the data into the spreadsheet. So to give scientists also migration information as well, for them to monitor um, migration patterns and inform their research. And this is just a little map from Monarch Watch of the monarch migration patterns throughout the seasons, and they actually built this using the tagging program and using the tags that anyone can do and record. And a part of our tagging is also being able to experience the monarch metamorphosis, which is always a very intriguing to youth and adults, no matter what age, because you really get to see the progression of the monarch butterfly, how resilient they are, yet how fragile they are when they're due to diseases and other like pesticides and environmental issues. So it really shows students that they need to protect these monarchs while also experiencing a lot of students reflected that the monarchs are kind of no different than us. They're always kind of moving forward and evolving. And it's just a very inspirational process. So that's why we raise the monarch butterflies along with our other biodiversity and climate education and activities. And this is a bit of the tagging that we do. Oh, also these photos are also taken from um our own. These are photos I've taken of raising the monarch butterflies. So you can really see the diverse stages, and it's really, really fascinating. Um, and then after the monarchs emerge, we tag them with the monarch watch tags, which are little stickers. They're sticky in the back, so they could attach onto the wings, and they're specifically engineered so that they're light enough so the monarchs could still fly properly. And how we tag them is we hold the leading edge of the forewing where their main like dominant muscle is. And then after we hold them in place, we place the sticker um or the tagging sticker on the discal cell, which is this middle glove shaped cell on the outside of their um hind wing. And you can see that there's a um, number and letter code here. And basically, we put the tag code onto the spreadsheet along with when and where the monarchs were tagged. This is my tagging sheet for Monarchs Matter. You can see this monarch has a tag code of AHCX 281, and then that corresponds with each row. And we also note whether the monarch is male or female and whether it's reared or wild. And after, when these monarchs fly to Mexico, the scientists there will look for these tagged monarchs, and it's basically a tag and recovery process where after they recover the monarchs, they search for the information that we submitted here onto our spreadsheet, and they'll correspond the information to see um, where the monarch has been found, and other people can also log any monarch recoveries as they're migrating so they could see the specific path that the monarchs are taking as well if there's enough data. And this is a photo of a tag monarch that was found in Mexico during the winter. And then last but not least, it's all about the metamorphosis from within. So as our students see the monarchs metamorphose, they also reflect on their perspective of the environment and what they could do to help with the biodiversity loss and climate change and all the environmental issues that are happening. And so some of the things that we do are like end of program reflections as well as writing poems, which we laminated and hung around the native plant garden. And we invite communities to come in to view these poems and also tag and release monarch butterflies with us. Here, a student is holding a monarch butterfly. So it's always a really cool experience to interact with nature this directly. Yeah, that is it for my presentation. So I'll hand it over to Megan or Michaela if she wants to start.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. If you have questions for Cynthia about Monarchs Matter or specific things about what she covered, we will have some time at the end of this. But yeah, so I will hand things over to Michaela to talk all things monarchs and milkweed.
Awesome. That was a really interesting summary, Cynthia, of all of the great work you guys are doing. I loved seeing all the pictures of people, getting into it, planting milkweed, writing poetry is really exciting. It's one insect that gets people very, very excited, and I just love that about them. Okay, can you guys see the butterfly and the milkweed leaf on my screen just to make sure everything's coming up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Cynthia, of course, kind of gave a little bit of an overview of the life cycle already, so I won't spend a tremendous amount of time on that. But I do like to start when we are talking about planting milkweed, just how important the plant is for the monarch's life cycle. So starting from the beginning, you can see the monarch butterfly that is over on the right-hand side laying eggs on the milkweed plant. Um, you can see adult monarch butterflies laying up to 300 between 300 and 500 up to 500 eggs at a time on milkweed plants, which is just amazing that they can lay that many eggs. They'll be laying them kind of singly on the plant. And then the photo on the left hand side of the single egg on the plant is just about how that looks. You can often find them on the underside of the leaves. So if you do get the milkweed planted in your yard and you're not seeing any eggs on the top of the leaves, be sure to check under them just to make sure that they're not kind of hiding just out of sight. So this is a close-up of what the egg is looking like. We get a lot of questions, because there's other tussock moths and things that will lay eggs on milkweed of what you're looking for the monarch butterfly egg. You're looking for something like this that has those long vertical lines throughout it. It's kind of like it's got a bit of a sheen to it, kind of like a pearl, and it is a little bit pointed at the top of the egg. And so that's kind of what your egg is going to look like once you get your milkweed planted. On the left hand side, I was trying to see if I could enable a pointer. I haven't used Zoom in a long time. Here we go. Okay, so here is our first instar monarch caterpillar. It's just come out of the egg and it's eating the remnants of the casing that it's just come out of there. So that's another thing to look for on your milkweed when you get it planted and are hopefully starting to see monarch butterflies. This is our, first instar caterpillar that has just emerged. And you can see tiny little circles where they're just barely chewing on the basic surface of the leaf, where they're not going to get completely overwhelmed with that milky characteristic sap that is coming out of the milkweed. Because although the caterpillar can handle the cardenolides, the toxicity of that sap, they still don't necessarily want to be completely gummed up with it, especially when they are a tiny little caterpillar that is just hatched out. This is another example of that. This is a much larger caterpillar, but it has chewed right at the stem of this leaf, so where it's kind of bent over. You'll see that with a lot of the larger, older caterpillars that are getting close to pupation, and that is another thing that they do to make sure they're not getting all gunked up with the milkweed sap that's coming out, because the sap won't be able to flow as readily into this leaf where it's cut off. Just really interesting things to look out for when you do get your milkweed planted and your garden up and going. So this is, of course, what the monarch is going to look like when it is about to pupate. They're going to form this J-shaped formation. They'll form this kind of little silk pad at the top attached to usually a plant or a shrub, or maybe the side of your porch, something that's usually not on the milkweed plant. They'll kind of venture off of that to form their chrysalis. And at that point, the monarch will actually shed its skin. It will emerge into its chrysalis. It'll basically be under the skin at that point, and then you will have the really beautiful monarch chrysalis hanging off of your shrub tree or anywhere else. I've seen them on the sides of flower pots, on the side of people's porches, anywhere like that. So this is what the chrysalis looks like when it is just about to close. So this might be after between 10 days to 2 weeks of being in that chrysalis forming. And then this is the monarch closing from that clear chrysalis at that point. It will look really strange when it first emerges, because it's been, very bound into that small space. But this is just where the monarch will have to hang upside down, use gravity, and insect blood is called hemolymph, and it will start to flow using gravity, and then the monarch will also kind of start to flutter its wings, to get everything pumped through into its veins, and then it will form, the more characteristic monarch shape. And all of this is possible because of the milkweed plant that the monarch caterpillars eat and rely on. So just to give you an idea of the timeline of this, they're going to spend about 3 to 5 days in the egg. The larval stages, it goes through 5 what we call instar stages. So in between each instar, first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, it's going to shed its skin and emerge into a larger caterpillar, as it's just a continuous eating machine of milkweed. So it's going to spend 10 to 14 days as a caterpillar. And then the pupal stage is generally going to last somewhere between 10 days to 2 weeks, when it's in the heat of the summer and it's quite warm outside, at least where I am based in Kentucky, where we're watching, caterpillars in the life cycle. That's generally going to be more around like the 11 to 12 day mark when it's very warm. Once we get into, the later monarchs that have not left yet for the year, they're still going through the cycle before migration. If we get some of those cooler days, it'll be longer into the 2 week mark. And then, of course, our adult butterflies, which everyone is probably well aware at this point, they can live, 1 month if they are 1 to 2 months if they are the summer life cycle of the or the summer generations of the monarch butterfly, or up to 9 months for that migratory generation. So one of the biggest things that people do to support the monarch butterfly is planting monarch way stations. And my guess is that everyone on this call has probably heard that term already, but the monarch way station is in itself just a garden that provides all of the things that a monarch needs throughout its life cycle. So it's going to be the milkweed plants for the caterpillars to eat. These are 2 caterpillars that I found at our work headquarters where we planted milkweed. So they are eating like crazy on those milkweed leaves. And then, of course, you're going to have the nectar plants, so your flowers, because the adult butterflies that are flying around that are making that migration, they need to stop and get food sources too, and they do that in the way of drinking nectar from flowers. So your monarch way station is just going to have everything from your egg-laying monarchs to lay eggs on the milkweed, to the caterpillar food, to the nectar sources in those flowers. But what we're, of course, going to be talking about today is our milkweed plants. So we're going to get into more detail on these. They range, I think there's probably over 70 native species of milkweed, maybe more throughout the US. There's about 13 where I'm based in Kentucky. But of course, some of those are quite rare. You're not going to find all of them at your garden stores. 2 of probably the most common ones that you can find are this butterfly milkweed, this bright orange, it's really, really hard to miss, and the common milkweed, with those really interesting blooms on it, and very, very wide leaves, and it grows very, very tall. So those are some of the 2 that I see most frequently, but there are many more species. So we're going to talk about those and get into some really interesting research that was done at the University of Kentucky a few years back. This was, I'll just go ahead and disclaimer that this research was not done by me. It was done by Dr. Adam Baker and Dr. Dan Potter. So Dr. Dan Potter was the professor at the University of Kentucky, and Adam Baker actually got his PhD doing this research on milkweed. So I always like to share what they were looking into when we're talking about monarch way stations, because it was really fascinating. It ended up being an extremely widely shared publication as far as scientific publications go. They do get shared in the kind of the research communities, but they don't always make it out to a wider interested audience. But what Doctors Baker and Potter were well aware of all the attention around monarchs, milkweed, pollinators, just all of these people are planting monarch way stations, and they set out to really take a look at, you know, all of these people are planting these gardens. Are they successful? First of all, are they attracting monarchs? Are monarchs even using these gardens? Are they laying eggs in them? And they were also looking into, okay, if they are successful, if people are going to be planting them anyway, are there ways that we can recommend for them to be the most successful for the use of monarch butterflies? So it was really exciting that they started this project. Adam, at the time, he selected 8 species of milkweed, and this was mostly based, I'm fairly certain this was mostly based on kind of species that were available, as far as what you're going to find commonly at places that actually sell milkweed. He didn't choose any of the extremely rare species that are only kind of just found, as you're searching for them in woodlands or anything like that. He wanted to choose species that were accessible and ones that are going to be common, like our common milkweed, our butterfly swamp, that sort of thing. So he chose his 8 species. He created these plots and did plantings of gardens at the University of Kentucky Arboretum so that they could study the use of caterpillars, adult monarchs, and of course eggs throughout the couple years that he did this study. And then he also looked into whether the way that a garden is planted would make it more attractive to monarch butterflies. So the first setup that they did, these little green circles are the milkweed plants all along the outside of the garden, with the rest of your nectar plants in the middle. They did a setup where you would put all of your other plants on the outside and your milkweeds in the middle. And then they have kind of the no formal structure garden. So this one just is a bit of a random placement. And so they did this study over a couple of years and got some really exciting results when they wrapped up the study and analyzed the data that had come in. They were literally on their hands and knees crawling through these gardens, searching through every leaf. So they put a lot of work into going in and making sure that the use was recorded as far as monarch butterflies in these gardens. So what they found is that these small gardens, even these small plantings, were very successful. Monarchs readily colonized the gardens, and all 8 species in the study did support larval growth of monarchs, which was interesting. There were no milkweeds that just didn't have any monarchs at all. And they also found that there were more eggs on and larvae on some of the taller milkweeds. So we'll get a little bit more into those species in a second. But they did record that design, the garden design, the 3 that they were set out to study. It did matter. The milkweed placement on the outside edge of the way station yielded 2 to 3 times more eggs and larvae than the other gardens. So that was really interesting as well. And they also saw that, spacing the milkweeds about 1 to 2 feet apart was more successful than just kind of clumping them all together, where maybe the monarchs weren't able to, if they're flying really high and they're looking for somewhere to kind of drop down and lay eggs, they may not have noticed as much as the ones that were more spaced apart. And they also notice that mulching around these milkweed, so kind of putting mulch like in this photo around them, helped them stand out a little bit more than the other vegetation, and hopefully monarchs could kind of zone in on that a little bit better. And then of course reducing kind of the more weedy vegetation around the milkweeds can always help to make them stand out a little bit more in the garden. So this is their design of what this would look like. So this is a little graphic they made with each of these circles is the milkweed with the mulch around it. They're a little bit spaced apart and they're on the outside edge of the garden. So then you can have your nectar plants like Joe Pye weed, ironweed. This is Mexican sunflower. Coreopsis, that's tick seeds, the false indigo, Hypericum, that's St. John's wort, and button bushes. Those are just some suggestions of nectar plants for monarchs, but there are many, many more that you can plant, and there's all kinds of resources where you can find those that I will share a little bit later. The most important thing with your nectar plants is to have something that blooms, something blooming in spring, summer, and fall. So you have something in bloom at any point in the year where a monarch might be visiting. So here's a look at one of the statements I made earlier. So the taller monarchs were found to be more attractive to, or taller milkweeds, sorry, were found to be more attractive to the egg-laying monarchs. So these stood out as swamp milkweed. It's not always as tall the first year that you plant it, but by the second year, it can be, 4 or 5 feet, sometimes as tall as the like 6 foot common milkweed can get by the second or third year. The common milkweed, of course, that's a very broad leafed. It can get quite tall. If you've ever kind of walked into a stand of common milkweed, you know just how tall it can get. It can cover your head at times. And so these are two species that are very, very common and are native to most of the United States and up into kind of Eastern Canada. And then your showy milkweed is going to be more of a Western species or a Midwestern species. So in my area and Cynthia's area, that one's not going to be native. But if you're in the Midwest or further west, that is a good broad-leaved species similar to common. And so these species are the ones that yielded quite high bee diversity. So they do support monarch butterflies. There were eggs and larvae found on all of the milkweed species that I'm showing here. But I wanted to point out this section because our butterfly milkweed stood out in the research as one that had a high native bee diversity. Of course, we're always trying to support our bumblebees and our solitary bees. The world milkweed, this one also fell into that category. This one, I have seen monarch caterpillars on this one. It looks really funny when there's a large monarch because the leaves are just so tiny, the world milkweed. But it is a good one to have in your garden. Maybe not the main source of milkweed, because if you get a monarch laying a lot of eggs, you may want something like the common milkweed that has, just the very large leaves for them to feed off of. But it is really a cool one to have and provide some diversity and, of course, nectar resources in all of the flowers as well. And then the narrow-leaved milkweed, this is going to be our far west or far western species, and also can be found into Mexico. I think this one is the same as the Mexican world milkweed. That's another common name for it. Just depends on the area you're in that you might call it a different name. That one was also found to support high levels of bee diversity. I wanted to point out that Monarch Watch has this ecoregions map on their website, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint so people have the links to this. But you can look, depending on your area, on the Monarch Watch website, and they'll make recommendations for different species that you can plant that are native to your home. So this is a quote from Dr. Chip Taylor that has since retired from Monarch Watch, but ran the Monarch Watch program in Kansas for a very, very long time to assure a future for monarchs. Conservation and restoration of milkweeds needs to become a national priority. And it has been quite a hot topic for a long time, or well, not necessarily a long time, but for maybe the past like 8 or so years that people have been quite focused on this, but there definitely needs to be, more done and more milkweed planted to ensure that we can bring back the numbers of monarch butterflies to persist into the future. And of course, I always like to point out that, like we were just talking about, the milkweed supports a wide variety of pollinating species. There are a variety of different butterflies that will nectar off of it. This is a brown-belted bumblebee, getting nectar from a common milkweed. So if you go out and look at milkweeds in the summertime, you'll often almost like hear the activity. If you're not a big fan of bees, maybe don't get super close, but you can kind of hear the buzzing while you're standing next to the milkweeds, because there's just so many species that use it as a resource. I wanted to put a couple of links here that we can share after this. Just there's different places you can get planting guides. Monarch Joint Venture has a ton of resources. But I did want to point out Monarch Watch has both free milkweed plugs for schools and nonprofits. That's an application process that you have to submit to get what they call a milkweed grant. So they will look at your project and decide whether to distribute free milkweeds to you or not. We have done this second one before for larger scale restoration. You can apply to receive hundreds of milkweeds. We've gotten like 400 or 500 milkweeds for plantings before, and that will be both of those options are application processes to get free milkweeds. You do have to pay for the shipping, but in comparison to what you're getting, it's really great to have those. And then this website, you can order almost free milkweed seeds. I think you have to pay a little bit for shipping as well, but it's very low cost. And then of course garden clubs, if you look in your area and you have a wild ones chapter, a lot of these offer seed swaps, so people are ready to give away their seeds of nectar plants and milkweed at these kind of events. They want to give away what their garden is producing. The North American Butterfly Association has chapters in different places, and then if you're looking at a larger scale restoration or you have farmland or anything, the Natural Resources and Conservation Service, they often have programs where you can apply at your generally contact your county extension office, and they can get you hooked up with the right person that can tell you if they have pollinator seed or pollinator programs to do those plantings. And with that, I am wrapped up with my PowerPoint, but we can go back to any of the slides if people have questions.
Great. And actually, we do have one question in the chat.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it says, is there any problem with honey made from milkweed?
Honey made, oh, like the bees that would be collecting the pollen and then, I've never thought about that before, but I don't think so. Like, I don't think the toxicity is gonna spread into the honey, but I'm also not an apiarist, so I don't entirely know much about the content, the amount of contents in the honey.
I've got some questions, some comments, if I might add to what Michaela said. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
I would say for a starter or someone who's just starting a pollinator garden, it's much preferable to get plugs or rather than seeds. Planting milkweed from seed can be pretty difficult. Milkweed is a surface germinator, which means that people tend to, if they have seed, plant it too deeply. And at the very least, you should not cover milkweed seed with more than 1/8 of an inch of soil. Would you agree, Michaela?
Yeah, that's a really great point.
And then you have to remember, too, that the optimal time for planting, if you're planting from seed, is the fall. And the reason is that milkweed is actually a wildflower, and it requires stratification, which is a fancy word for winterization. It needs that winterizing, the freezing, thawing, back and forth that you get during the winter before it's going to germinate. So, you can't buy milkweed seed in the spring and expect it to come up the first year. Thirdly, like many wildflowers, coneflowers are another example. If you're planting from seed, it will often take 2 years before you're going to get a plant above soil because milkweed tends to develop root systems first before you're going to see much plant above the surface. what else did I have to say here? One one additional plant, Michaela and others, and this was actually recommended to me by Dan Potter. You mentioned Dan at University
Yeah.
of Kentucky. If you've got an open field, I would recommend something called heptacodium, or in English, temples of bloom, or sometimes called seven sun flower trees, sun SON. These are an Asian species, but they're not invasive. Like I say, they were recommended to me by the University of Kentucky Extension. I hope, well, enough to let that ring. And the reason I recommend those trees, incidentally, you can buy them from butterflybushes.com, which is a nursery in Michigan. They get to be about 18 feet. They're very bushy. And the reasons that they're very, very good is that they produce a tremendous number of nectar producing flowers, and they will last until a heavy frost. So in Kentucky, for example, I planted or given away about 100 around. And Michaela and I live pretty close together in central Kentucky. Um, they will they will produce flowers until late October, even early November, and that's good because if you have a late migrating butterfly coming through, let's say Kentucky, and it's looking for food and it's not going to find many flowers at that point in the year, the heptacodium, the temples of bloom, will often suffice. So those are just some comments that I would make in addition to Michaela's very, very useful summary. That's all I have to say.
I'll add to that just a little bit. As far as the cold stratification, if you do buy seeds, you can kind of fake the stratification period by putting them in the fridge over, like sometimes I just do it in the winter anyway, and then plant them in the spring just to make sure they get around, that 30 days of cold temperature. But you can bag them and put them in the fridge to mimic the natural process.
They say about 6 weeks, don't they, for like to use
Yeah.
in a damp paper towel and in a plastic bag. Yeah.
But yeah, like Mike said, it's a lot easier to buy plugs when you're first starting out. So I usually just ask around what the like nurseries around us that are carrying for the year, and at least in our area, they're most commonly going to be the swamp common, and the butterfly milkweed is what I see the most of, but I'm not sure where everybody is based out of here. There might be different plants that are offered.
Yeah, you don't want to plant tropical milkweed unless you're in the tropics. That's a no-no. You have to be very careful. I don't think you can buy tropical milkweed unless you're actually maybe in Florida or one of the more semi-tropical states, but you have to be careful.
Yeah, and Michaela or Cynthia, I'll just ask a question too, and I'll save a little bit of time. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Forest for Monarchs and just connect this work to what we do at Forest for Monarchs. But are there any advice you would give someone or those that are listening, of things to avoid when gardening or rearing caterpillars? And that could be maybe where they buy their plants, or things that they're using when they're gardening. Anything that you would say folks should try to avoid to have a better success? I don't know who wants to start. Sorry.
You can start if you want, Cynthia.
Oh yeah, so for rearing, I would say definitely start small, and if you have um like containers, I would say I use like takeout containers, the clear ones, so we can like see inside. But like if they're around like this big, I would say like no more than 2 or 3 caterpillars per container. Um, so it's more like sanitary, as well as like if there's any potential disease in one of the caterpillars, it won't spread as easily or to other caterpillars if you're raising more than like 2 or 3. But generally, if you like separate them, I think that would be a bit better. And also, like when the caterpillars molt, they like to like climb to the side of the container or the top of the container. And a lot of people are concerned about that when that happens since they're not eating, but that's a very natural behavior for them to like move away from their food while they're molting or like when they're vulnerable.
Great. Thank you.
I'll add just a little bit on the gardening side that when you're looking for milkweeds and, of course, when you're planting in your own garden, just avoiding pesticides as much as possible because, of course, monarch butterflies, caterpillars, they're all insects, so they're going to be impacted by anything that is sprayed. In big box stores, it can be a little hard to, tell whether things have been pre-treated or there's, of course, seeds that have already been pre-coated. So definitely, look at labels as much as possible. I always try to buy from, local nurseries as much as possible that can actually tell you like, oh, well, we grew that, in that greenhouse right there. So we know that it was safe. I'm not saying you can't shop around at some of the larger places, but just be cautious of some of the stores that are much larger and you don't necessarily know, how far that the plant has been shipped from or where it came from, whether it's been pre-treated with any kind of pesticide to, maintain pet or what people consider pests or insects not eating it. But of course, we're planting these plants specifically for insects to eat.
Great.
Yeah, if you buy your plugs online, the nursery will generally tell you whether or not they are neonicotinoid free, and if they don't tell you, you can ask. But most of the good nurseries that cater to creatures like monarch butterflies do try to market things that are not coated with neonics, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. It says something like, so the 4 butterflies that sort of try to look out for that.
Perfect. Yeah. And do we have any questions from anyone else? But I'll just do a little talk about Forest for Monarchs. But any other questions?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear
great.
you.
Yeah, I'm Tom. How are you today? This is very, very nice. I enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Nice presentation. I'm collecting. Well, I discovered catch and release butterflies long before there was catch and release fishing. It's something I've done all my life. But one thing we've noticed, especially with the monarchs, is if we collect a caterpillar, we have a much greater success rate of raising that to a full butterfly if it's 1.25 inches or longer. Below that, there's we're pretty good at this point. Most survive, but if we go below that, we know there's definitely a higher level of caterpillars that just simply don't. We don't know why they don't survive, but when that's lower than that, it seems to make a big difference. So we generally do the bigger the caterpillar, the better. In terms of if you want to put it in captivity. So if you may tell people that if they have milkweed in their property and they regularly get caterpillars and they want to raise a couple of them, it's okay to leave those caterpillars out there for a few days and let them just toughen up and get a little bit larger before you move them, and it seems to work much better for us that way.
That's a great point. I think it's a collective effort of everyone trying different strategies. And I know someone who lives by a golf course, and she'll go out before they spray, and she'll sort of run through their gardening area and pull some of the milkweed leaves with the caterpillar eggs on them, or the caterpillars themselves, and try to get those into rear before the chemicals are sprayed on the golf course. So there's all different things. And I know a report came out several years ago that made some folks hesitant to rear caterpillars. But that's actually it's a great thing to still rear caterpillars. It was a very specific set of circumstances in a scientific environment that led to those results. And folks' homes aren't that, your environment isn't that different, drastically different from the outside versus a lab setting. So definitely rearing. Cynthia has some great resources as well at Monarchs Matters about rearing caterpillars. And I think, Tom, that's a great point too, that I think I've heard that from some folks too, that the larger the caterpillars, the better the success. Sometimes the smaller ones, I've reared them and they just kind of disappear
Right, that does happen.
Where'd it go? Yeah, so that can be a challenge for sure. Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments or any successes that you've had with gardening that you would want to share with the group? No. Okay, well, I am not going to share my screen just because my tech is being a bit it's being temperamental. I lost power about 45 minutes before this started. So, but at Forest for Monarchs, I think many of you have come from Forest for Monarchs, so you're familiar with what we do. But in case you are not as familiar, Forest for Monarchs, we are a community forestry program. All of our work is based in Mexico, and we say we do one thing and we do one thing well, and that is plant trees. The Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve and the buffer zone or zone of influence, you might hear as well, is one of our main priority areas. We also reforest in the Highland Lakes watershed region, and that's where our tree nursery is. It's about 3 hours between the two areas, but they are technically two separate regions, slightly sort of similar climates, but slightly different biodiversity in the regions. But we always say we can plant as many trees as we can in Mexico, but without the help of folks like you on this call, doing things in your own backyards, in your communities with milkweed, with nectar producing plants, the monarchs really won't survive. It's a tri-national effort for a migratory species that goes from Canada all the way to Mexico every year. And so it's going to take us all doing something. We don't all have to do everything, but if we all do one small thing, I think we can see the monarchs hopefully have a long-term survival. A report came out this year from the World Wildlife Foundation Mexico, which I'll try to find that report and put it in. I'll do a follow-up email with some of the slides that Michaela's talked about, that Cynthia has, and some other resources. But that report did show that conservation efforts are working. And that in Mexico in particular, this is the second year in a row where we've seen deforestation go down, which is really exciting. And I think it means that you're seeing more folks in the region excited about reforestation and wanting to conserve their land. That's what we're seeing. So we partner specifically with indigenous communities and ejidos. So these are the folks that they have rights to their land. It's different structures for different communities, but they're the ones that are really the most vulnerable to the climate crisis and to sort of the illegal logging that might happen in the region. And they're the ones really on the front lines. They're reforesting. We're donating our trees directly to them, and they're the ones getting them in the ground and making sure they survive, not just for 1 year, but for many years. And that's how we've been able to do this for 30 years, is the community there in Mexico and you folks here, our Forest for Monarchs community. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining us. And before we sign off, if there's any last questions or comments, please feel free to add them. If you have questions that come up later, specifically for me and Forest for Monarchs, or for Michaela or Cynthia, please don't hesitate to email me directly, and I'll try to get the answer or get you to the right person. And yeah, I think it's exciting that we have this group, and I think we can all do something. And yeah, I think I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the monarchs for the future. And I'll leave you on this, that everyone in this call, you're getting the news before everyone else, probably a month or two in advance. But this year, Forest for Monarchs, we will be planting just under 1 million trees this summer. So we could not do that without this community. So very grateful to all of you. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you, Michaela, and thank you, Cynthia. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
for coming.
Thank
Much
you.
appreciated.
Yes, thank you for joining.